The late afternoon light filtered through the crystal-clear dome of the ballroom, casting everything in shades of amber and rose gold. The kind of illumination that made imperfection impossible, that turned even shadows into something beautiful and deliberate. Marble columns rose like silent sentinels around the vast space. White roses cascaded from every conceivable surface, their perfume hanging so thick it felt like breathing through silk. Champagne flutes clinked in rhythm with orchestral strings, and somewhere beneath it all, there was the sound of certainty, the sound of a wedding that had been planned to perfection, down to the last detail. Luna stood at the periphery of it all, her fingers gripping the small beaded clutch she'd chosen weeks ago, a clutch that matched her sage green dress. A dress that had taken her 3 hours to select because it needed to be elegant without demanding attention, beautiful without insisting on visibility. Her right side felt exposed despite the flowing sleeve she'd had specially tailored, designed by a seamstress who understood without needing explanation that absence required careful concealment. Arriving alone had felt like a risk, the kind of risk that made her stomach tight as she moved through corridors of people who seemed to see right through her, or perhaps more accurately, who saw her just long enough for their eyes to register the missing arm, the incomplete body, before instinctively looking away. A cluster of women near the champagne station caught sight of her, and their faces immediately arranged themselves into the expression Luna had come to recognize as pity dressed up as kindness. One reached out, her hand briefly touching Luna's shoulder with the gentleness you might use on something precious and fragile. "You're so brave for coming tonight," the woman said, and Luna heard in those words the unspoken addendum. Brave for existing despite your brokenness. Brave for showing your face despite your obvious inadequacy. Luna had learned long ago that there were ways to hear without letting anyone know you were listening, that you could feel the weight of someone's judgment without allowing it to show on your face, that the greatest skill a person like her could develop was the ability to occupy space without truly taking it up. She smoothed the fabric of her dress one more time, a habit born of anxiety, and caught her reflection in one of the ballroom's mirrored walls. Dark hair pulled back in a style that framed her face without calling attention to it, posture careful and composed, smile restrained and appropriate. She looked fine, presentable, acceptable. And yet, as she watched the room move around her, she felt precisely like a ghost, like she was present at her sister's wedding the way a memory is present, something that existed but held no real weight, no real consequence. Across the sprawling ballroom, Sophia moved like she had been born for this exact moment, born for the precise configuration of light and attention and adoration that surrounded her. Her laughter rose above the murmur of conversation, a sound that seemed to pull people toward her like she was the center of gravity and they were helpless planets rotating around her orbit. She stood encircled by bridesmaids in pastel colors, her mother on one side with eyes shining with pride, relatives and family friends forming a perfect circle of admiration that never seemed to break, never seemed to admit anyone who didn't belong. Sophia's wedding gown was a masterpiece of architecture and ambition, layers of expensive lace and hand-stitched silk that caught the light and transformed every movement into something that felt orchestrated, intentional, deserving of attention. Cameras flashed constantly around her, and with each flash, Sophia seemed to grow more luminous, more certain, more exactly what a bride was supposed to be. Luna watched from her position at the edge, and she told herself, as she had told herself countless times before, that she was genuinely happy for her sister. And this was true. Truly, genuinely, completely true. But happiness, Luna had discovered, did not erase the particular ache that bloomed in her chest when she understood what her presence at this moment really meant. There was no room in a space like this for two women. Sophia had always been the one people noticed first, the one teachers called on, the one relatives bragged about at gatherings, the one strangers remembered long after the conversation ended. And Luna had learned, gradually and then all at once, that the most graceful thing she could do was step back, was let her presence fade just enough to make space for Sophia's brightness to be absolute. It had started as a conscious choice, but over time it had calcified into something automatic, something that happened without her permission. A habit so deep that she no longer knew if she was choosing to disappear or if disappearing had simply become her fundamental nature. People brushed past her throughout the evening with apologies that seemed perfunctory, as if they were encountering an obstacle they hadn't expected rather than a person. Some of them paused, their eyes traveling to her right side where the dress was empty, and Luna watched the micro-expressions flicker across their faces. Discomfort, guilt, the desperate searching for something appropriate to say. A man offered her a chair she hadn't asked for, and when she thanked him, his relief was palpable, as if he'd managed to perform some necessary kindness and could now move on with his evening. A woman patted her shoulder with a smile that managed to be both warm and infinitely sad, as if Luna were something breakable that required careful handling, as if her very presence at this event was an act of courage rather than simply a matter of showing up. The small kindnesses accumulated like snow, and Luna felt them accumulating, felt the weight of everyone's carefully curated compassion, and none of it made her feel less alone. She stood at the edges of conversations, hovering just close enough that she could hear what was being said without being included in the actual speaking, and she wondered sometimes if anyone noticed how consistently she found herself in these liminal spaces, these in-between places where she was present but not required, visible but not seen. Her throat felt tight as she took a sip of sparkling water from a glass that had been offered to her, and the liquid tasted like nothing. No flavor, no texture, just the sensation of swallowing. But beneath the careful construction of her evening, beneath the facade of acceptance and gratitude, something was shifting in Luna's mind, something that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. The truth that had been building in her chest for years finally solidified into clarity as she watched her sister command the entire room with the simple fact of her existence. Luna wasn't just overlooked. She wasn't simply not noticed. She was expected, truly, fundamentally expected, to remain invisible. People wanted her to be small and quiet and grateful for the scraps of inclusion they tossed her way. The world had made it clear, through 1,000 micro-moments and carefully worded compliments, that her role was to fade into the background, to let others shine, to accept her place as the supporting character in a story that would never be about her. She was expected to smile politely when people pitied her, to remain grateful for the smallest gestures of kindness that were really just acknowledgments of pity masquerading as generosity. She was expected to stand silently while her sister commanded every eye, every camera, every moment of joy that could be harvested from this evening. And as the music swelled and guests began moving toward the banquet tables, as Sophia laughed her perfect laugh and commanded her perfect moment, Luna felt something settle into her bones like cold clarity. Just get through the night, she told herself, the same mantra she'd been repeating for years. Be quiet, be small, don't take up space, don't make anyone uncomfortable. Be the kind of person people can forget about, and in forgetting, protect yourself from the weight of their judgment. But even as she thought it, even as she whispered those words like a prayer to herself, something whispered back. A voice that sounded nothing like the person she'd learned to be. Something in Luna was waking up, was stirring under the weight of years of making herself smaller. And this was the moment, though she didn't know it yet, where everything would change. This was the moment where invisibility would stop being her protection and start being her prison. This was the last night she would ever believe that being overlooked was the safest place to hide. Because before this evening ended, someone would walk through those ballroom doors who saw her, really saw her, not through the lens of pity or discomfort or the need to perform kindness, but with the kind of attention that made invisibility impossible. And that choice, that singular moment of being truly chosen, would shatter every story she'd ever told herself about her place in the world. Welcome to Story Lens TV, where the stories we tell you reshape the way you see the world. I'm telling you this one tonight because sometimes visibility is an act of courage. Sometimes the people we overlook are the strongest ones in the room. If you're watching us for the first time, we'd love to have you stay for what comes next. This story gets darker, more dangerous, and more beautiful than you might expect. So if you're feeling it, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Luna realizes who Dominic really is, and drop a comment down below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one, because at Story Lens TV, every viewer is seen. Every comment matters. Every voice counts. Now, let's continue into the moment that changes everything. The night before the wedding, Luna had sat alone in her small apartment, the kind of space that felt too empty and too full at the same time, where the silence had weight and the walls held the accumulated loneliness of months and years. The dress hung on the closet door like a reminder of everything she was trying not to feel, and her phone rested beside her on the narrow bed, the screen glowing softly in the darkness. She had reached for it with her left hand, the only hand she had, and opened the app. The one she told herself meant nothing, the one she used only because it allowed her to speak without being seen. Dominic was online. He existed only as words on her screen, only as the careful arrangement of letters that formed thoughts and questions and observations that made her feel like she was conversing with someone who actually wanted to know her. They had met weeks ago in this digital space, quietly, slowly, without expectation or demand. He never asked what she looked like, never requested photos or proof that she was who she claimed to be, never filled the silences between messages with empty noise. Instead, he asked about her day, about the way she saw spaces and moved through the world, about what made her feel calm or anxious or hopeful. And tonight, with her chest feeling too tight to hold everything inside, she had typed and then deleted and then typed again. "Tomorrow is my sister's wedding." The reply came quickly, as if he'd been waiting for her to speak. "Are you looking forward to it?" Luna had smiled sadly at the screen, recognizing the careful way he phrased questions, always leaving room for her to say what she meant rather than what was expected. "I think I'm supposed to be," she typed back. The 3 dots appeared and vanished, appeared again, and she waited with her heart doing something strange in her chest, something that felt like anticipation mixed with dread. "What does that mean?" he asked, and the question opened something inside her that had been locked for so long she'd forgotten it was there. It meant too much. It meant standing alone in a crowd. It meant being watched without being seen. It meant smiles that hurt more than open cruelty ever could. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly over the screen, then told the truth in a way she hadn't told it to anyone before. "I will be there, but I will feel invisible," she wrote. There was a pause longer than usual, and for a moment Luna regretted saying anything, regretted letting herself lean into someone who existed only as words on a screen, someone who could disappear at any moment without consequence or explanation. Then the message appeared, simple and devastating in its simplicity. "You are not invisible to me." Her throat tightened. She did not know why that sentence landed so deeply, why those 6 words seemed to crack something open inside her that had been sealed shut for years. But they did. They talked for hours after that, about nothing and everything, about weddings and how they made people pretend to be versions of themselves they could barely sustain, about how silence could feel louder than noise, about how loneliness didn't always look like being alone. Sometimes it looked like standing in a room full of people and feeling more isolated than if you'd stayed home. At some point near midnight, Dominic said something that made Luna laugh softly, genuinely, and the sound surprised her because she hadn't laughed like that in years, hadn't felt that lightness in her chest that came from being understood rather than pitied. The clock glowed late. The room felt still, and Luna typed something she had not planned to say, something that felt reckless and necessary in equal measure. "Sometimes I wish I could just disappear from events like that." She paused, her breath catching, then added before she could stop herself. "Or sometimes I wish someone would walk in with me, someone who sees me." Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen. That was too much. She should take it back, should laugh it off as a joke, should retreat into the safety of being vague and non-committal. But before she could type anything else, his response appeared. "What if I told you I was serious about coming?" Luna sat up, her pulse racing, certain she'd misunderstood. She read the message 3 times, for times, trying to find the irony or the gentle letdown hidden in the words. But there was none. She typed slowly, carefully, her fingers shaking. "You don't even know me in real life." His response was immediate, as if he'd been waiting for exactly that objection. "I know your voice through your words. I know how you think. I know how carefully you choose what to say. That tells me more than most first meetings ever do." Luna's chest ached. She swallowed hard. "Tomorrow it will be overwhelming," she typed, and it felt like a warning. Like she was giving him an out before he committed to something he didn't fully understand. "Send me the address," he wrote back. Her heart stopped. She laughed quietly to herself, certain he was joking, certain that when morning came this would reveal itself as a kind fantasy, a comforting fiction she'd allowed herself to believe for one lonely night. "You're serious," she typed, more statement than question. "Yes," came his reply. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She thought of the looks, the whispers, the pity. She thought of walking in alone again, of standing at the edges while Sophia commanded the center. She thought of what it might feel like, just once, to not stand by herself. And before fear could stop her, she typed the address and sent it. The moment she did, fear rushed in behind the hope. What had she just done? Who was this person? What if he didn't show up? What if he did? She lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling again, her heart racing, her mind spinning through every possible outcome. Dominic sent one final message before the night ended. Sleep. Tomorrow you won't walk in alone. Luna closed her eyes, telling herself not to believe it, telling herself that hope was dangerous and expectations led only to disappointment. But somewhere deep inside, something shifted because for the first time in years, the idea of being seen did not feel terrifying, it felt possible. And now, standing in the ballroom with the weight of invisibility pressing down on her like atmosphere, Luna felt that possibility hovering just out of reach, felt it like a promise that might break her if it turned out to be empty. The wedding was in full celebration, the kind of celebration that felt like a performance where everyone knew their lines and hit their marks with precision. The music floated softly through the warm air, punctuated by laughter and the delicate clink of crystal against crystal. Luna stood near one of the marble columns, holding a glass she hadn't tasted, watching the room move around her like water moving around a stone. She had already been there too long, long enough to feel the familiar ache settle into her chest. The ache that came from being present without being included, from existing without matching. People passed her without stopping, without asking, without truly noticing. Every smile aimed in her direction carried that same careful distance, that measured politeness that said, I see you but I don't want to engage. I acknowledge you but I don't want to know you. She was about to excuse herself, about to slip out quietly and find somewhere less suffocating to wait out the evening, when she felt it, the change. It was subtle at first, so subtle she thought she might be imagining it. The music faltered, just for a moment, as if the musicians had lost their place. Conversations paused mid-sentence, voices trailing off into silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, and Luna felt it before she understood it. That instinctive tightening in her chest, that sudden awareness that something significant had entered the space. If you're feeling what Luna's feeling right now, that moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself is about to shift, then you understand why stories like this matter. Sometimes we need to see someone choose visibility even when it terrifies them. If this is hitting you somewhere deep, make sure you don't miss what happens next. Stay with us. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, massive gilded doors that seemed to move in slow motion, and a man stepped inside. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He moved with a calm certainty that suggested he'd never asked permission for anything in his life, that the world simply made space for him because his presence demanded it. Dark custom suit, the kind that was tailored so precisely it looked like a second skin, sharp lines that emphasized his broad shoulders and controlled power. His neck was visible above his white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar to reveal intricate tattoos that spread across his skin like a map of a life lived outside conventional boundaries, and gold chains caught the light at his throat. Not ostentatious, but deliberate, a visual announcement that he belonged to a different world, one where rules were negotiable and power was currency. His presence did not demand attention in the loud, aggressive way. It commanded attention simply by existing, by taking up space with absolute confidence. Luna felt her breath catch. Her heart began to pound for reasons she could not fully explain, and she watched as his eyes scanned the room. Not aimlessly, not searching, but with the focused precision of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. And then his eyes found her. Immediately, as if there were a straight line drawn between them across the entire expanse of the ballroom. The space between them seemed to narrow, seemed to collapse all the distance and noise and movement into a single point of focus. Luna froze. Her fingers tightened around the glass she was holding. Her mind raced through possibilities and impossibilities. This could not be real, not here, not now, not him. But he was already moving toward her, and guests shifted aside instinctively as he passed, their bodies making way without conscious decision, as if some primal instinct recognized that you did not stand in the path of someone like him. Someone whispered his name, though Luna couldn't hear what they said. Someone else went quiet too quickly, their silence more telling than any words could have been. Across the room, Sophia's smile faltered just for a moment, her perfect composure cracking as she registered that something unexpected was happening, that her carefully orchestrated evening was being disrupted by a variable she hadn't accounted for. Dominic stopped in front of Luna, close enough that she could see the faint shadow along his jaw where he'd shaved hours ago, close enough to see the calm in his dark eyes, the absolute certainty in the way he stood. He smiled slightly, and the smile was not for the crowd, not a performance for the assembled guests. It was only for her. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice low and steady, with an edge of something that sounded like controlled amusement. Traffic was unforgiving. Luna could not speak. Her entire body vibrated with shock, with the collision of the digital world and the physical world, with the impossibility of this moment being real. And then he did something that made the entire ballroom gasp. Audibly, collectively, a sound that rippled through the space like a wave. He placed his hand gently at her back, not possessive, not hesitant, but claiming. And then he took her hand, her left hand, the only hand she had, and raised it slightly, publicly linking them, making a choice that everyone in that room could see and could not misunderstand. The gasp came from everywhere at once. From the guests near the champagne table and the relatives clustered by the entrance and the bridesmaids standing near Sophia. It was the sound of shock, of recognition, of 100 assumptions being overturned simultaneously. For the first time in her life, Luna was not invisible. She was not overlooked or dismissed or politely ignored. She was the absolute center of the room, and the weight of that attention felt like gravity reversing, like the world tilting on an axis she hadn't known existed. Sophia watched from a distance, her expression unreadable but her body language unmistakable. She had just realized that her sister possessed something she could never control, could never compete with, could never take away. Whispers erupted across the ballroom like fire catching dry wood. Questions rose in urgent, hushed tones. Who is that? Why is he with her? How does she know him? And Luna, standing there with Dominic's hand at her back and her own hand held in his, understood something that both terrified and exhilarated her. Being seen came with consequences she could not yet fathom. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Guests who had been offering Luna pity moments before now looked at her with fear, with calculation, with a kind of judgment that came not from dismissal but from assessment. Eyes followed her constantly as Dominic guided her through the ballroom, their gazes measuring, wondering, trying to solve the equation of why someone like him, someone who radiated power and danger in equal measure, would choose someone like her. A man in an expensive suit approached them, his smile practiced but his eyes uncertain, clearly trying to place Dominic in whatever mental catalog of important people he maintained. "I don't believe we've met," the man said, extending his hand with thin ambition. Dominic turned his gaze to him. Gray eyes completely unreadable, expression neutral, and simply said, "No, we haven't. Nothing more. No elaboration, no social niceties, just the flat statement that made it clear the conversation was over before it had begun." The man retreated quickly, his confidence evaporating, as if he'd suddenly remembered somewhere else he urgently needed to be. A ripple passed through the guests after that, recognition spreading not through certainty but through instinct, through the primal understanding that some people carried power in their bones and you felt it before you understood it. Another guest, emboldened by alcohol or stupidity, made a careless comment within earshot about differences and mismatched worlds. The kind of comment that was meant to sound observational but carried judgment in every syllable. Before Luna could react, before she could feel the shame rising in her chest, Dominic spoke. His words were quiet, almost polite, but something in them cut the air like a blade. "Be careful how you speak about her." The guest paled visibly, muttered an apology that sounded more like fear than remorse, and stepped away quickly. Luna stared at Dominic, her breath shallow, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. No one had ever defended her like that, without hesitation, without explanation, without needing to be asked. It was protection offered freely, and it felt like something she'd been waiting her entire life to experience without knowing she was waiting. Near the bar, a group of older men spoke in low voices, their laughter casual until Dominic glanced in their direction. The laughter stopped immediately, cut off mid-breath. One of them said something Luna couldn't hear, his voice barely above a whisper, and another hissed urgently, "Say it quieter." Luna leaned slightly toward Dominic, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "They know you," she said, and it was half question, half statement. He answered without looking away from the room, his attention constantly scanning for threats or complications. "They know of me," he said. "That's worse." Luna felt understanding settle in her stomach like cold water. Dominic existed in a world she did not understand, a world of power and danger and consequence that operated by rules she'd never learned. She should have been terrified. Everything rational in her mind told her she should be pulling away, putting distance between herself and whatever this man represented. But instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt safe. Not despite his danger, but because of it, because his danger was directed outward, was a shield rather than a threat. Dominic leaned closer. His voice meant only for her, intimate in the way it excluded everyone else in the room. "I know this is overwhelming," he said, "but you are safe with me." Luna's hands trembled as she realized the full weight of what he'd just done, of what claiming her publicly meant in a world where power mattered more than kindness, where being chosen by someone like him came with terrible costs she couldn't yet calculate. The air changed again, shifted in a way that made Luna's skin prickle with instinctive warning. A man appeared at the edge of the ballroom, moving with the kind of deliberate casualness that suggested nothing about his presence was casual at all. He was older than Dominic, somewhere in his 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a scar that cut across one side of his face. Visible proof that he existed in a world where violence left marks. He approached them with familiarity rather than respect, and Luna felt Dominic's body tense beside her, felt the way his hand tightened slightly at her back in what could have been protection or warning or both. The ballroom seemed to lean in, guests instinctively quieting as they sensed the shift in atmosphere, the way predators might quiet when a larger predator entered their territory. The man stopped in front of them, his smile cold and knowing. "Dominic," he said, and the name sounded like an accusation. "Raphael," Dominic replied, his voice dropping several degrees, frost forming on every syllable. Raphael's eyes flicked to Luna, assessing her with the kind of calculation that made her feel like currency rather than person, and then back to Dominic. When he spoke, his words were wrapped in layers of meaning, veiled threats disguised as observation. "You chose mercy over loyalty," Raphael said quietly, each word deliberate. "And people paid for that." Luna felt the revelation land like a physical blow. Dominic was not just someone who moved in circles of power. He had been part of something brutal, something that demanded loyalty and punished mercy, something that left bodies in its wake. Raphael continued, his voice carrying just far enough for nearby guests to hear, for the whispers to start spreading. "Still pretending you've changed? Still playing the savior?" Dominic's voice was ice when he spoke. "Leave. Now." Raphael laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Or what? You'll fight me? Here? In front of all these people? In front of her?" He emphasized the last word, making it clear that Luna was not just a witness but a weapon, something that could be used against Dominic simply by existing in his vicinity. Guests nearby went silent, some instinctively stepping back, their survival instincts recognizing a moment that could turn violent without warning. Dominic's jaw tightened, every muscle in his body coiled with controlled aggression. "This ends tonight," he said, and it sounded less like a threat than a promise. Raphael smiled, a victor's smile, as if he'd already won something Luna didn't understand. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd, melting into the press of bodies. But the threat he'd left behind lingered in the air like smoke. Luna looked up at Dominic, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. "What just happened? Who is he?" Dominic's eyes were still tracking Raphael's path through the crowd when he answered. "Someone who forgot the rules." But Luna saw the conflict in his eyes, saw the weight he carried, the past that clung to him like a shadow he could never quite shake. She wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what mercy had cost and what loyalty had demanded. But before she could form the questions, she felt overwhelmed by everything, by being seen, by being claimed, by being caught in a world of consequence she'd never asked to enter. She needed air. She needed space to think. She needed to be somewhere that wasn't the center of 100 watching eyes. Luna excused herself quietly, slipping away from Dominic's protective presence and moving toward the gardens that bordered the ballroom, where lanterns cast soft light between carefully manicured vines and the noise of the celebration faded to something manageable. The night air felt sharp against her skin, clearing some of the fog from her mind. She walked until she found herself in the darker edges of the garden, where the lanterns were spaced farther apart and the shadows grew thick enough to hide in. She wrapped her arm around herself, the familiar gesture of someone who'd learned to be both person and barrier, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. Dominic was not who she thought he was. Or rather, he was more than she'd imagined, carried more weight and danger and history than their careful digital conversations had revealed. She heard footsteps behind her, familiar footsteps, and turned expecting to see Dominic. Instead, Sophia emerged from between the vines, her perfect wedding makeup streaked slightly with tears, her composure finally cracked. "Luna," Sophia said softly, urgently, "we need to talk. Now." Luna's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain whatever distance she could. But something in her sister's voice stopped her. "Not now, Sophia," Luna said, exhausted. "Please," Sophia pressed, stepping closer. "I did something. I need to tell you." Luna froze, dread settling in her stomach. "What did you do?" Sophia swallowed hard, tears forming fresh in her eyes, and when she spoke, the words came out broken, guilty, desperate. "I started the rumors about you, about your arm, about you being inadequate. I thought it was nothing. I didn't know it would spread the way it did." The world tilted. Luna stared at her sister, unable to breathe, unable to process what she was hearing. The rumors that had followed her for years, the whispers about her disability making her less capable, less deserving, less worthy of love. Sophia had started them. Her own sister, the one person who should have protected her, had instead weaponized her vulnerability. "You did this." Luna's voice came out barely above a whisper, shock giving way to something darker, something that felt like betrayal cutting deeper than any physical wound. "I was jealous," Sophia confessed, the words tumbling out now, desperate and honest. "I was scared. When I saw him choose you tonight, when I saw everyone looking at you instead of me for once, I realized I didn't know how to not be the center. I'm so sorry." Luna took a step back, physically recoiling from the confession. "You made me doubt the only person who ever made me feel seen. You made me question whether I deserved anything good because you couldn't stand the idea of me having something you didn't." Sophia reached for her, tears streaming now, but Luna pulled away. "I trusted you," Luna said, and the words carried the weight of years of betrayal now made visible. "And now I don't know who to believe anymore." Luna turned and walked deeper into the garden, leaving Sophia behind, leaving the wedding behind, leaving everything behind except the overwhelming sense that she was trapped between two impossible truths. A man whose world was built on danger and a sister whose love had always been conditional on Luna remaining small. She stood alone in the dark between vines and lanterns, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her mind spinning through everything she'd learned, and she had no idea that someone else was watching, waiting, calculating how to use her newfound visibility against the man who'd claimed her. Being invisible had hurt in ways she'd learned to live with. But being seen like this, being caught in the center of forces she didn't understand, being used as leverage in battles she hadn't chosen, hurt in ways she didn't know how to survive. And somewhere in the darkness, Raphael was already planning his next move, already understanding that Luna was no longer just a woman at a wedding. She was the key to destroying everything Dominic had tried to become. This story continues beyond this moment, beyond this betrayal and revelation. But what happens next will determine whether being seen was the greatest gift Luna ever received, or the most dangerous choice she ever made. Because the moment Dominic claimed her hand, he didn't just make her visible. He made her a target. And in a world where power is the only currency that matters, targets don't stay safe for long. Luna wandered deeper into the darkened vineyard, her thoughts tangled with fear and doubt, with the weight of revelations that felt too heavy to carry alone. The lights of the wedding faded behind her, growing distant and dreamlike, until the music became nothing more than a distant hum that barely registered against the sound of her own heartbeat and the crunch of gravel beneath her feet. She did not know where she was going, only that she needed to move, needed to put distance between herself and the collision of truths that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The air grew cooler the farther she walked, the lanterns spaced so far apart now that shadows pooled thick and dark between the vines. She stopped finally, her breath coming in shallow gasps, and wrapped her arm around herself in the habitual gesture of someone who had learned to be both person and protection. Behind her, a voice emerged from the darkness, soft, too calm, the kind of calm that sent every survival instinct screaming. "You should not be alone out here," the voice said. Luna froze, her body reacting before her mind could catch up, every nerve ending suddenly alive with the primal recognition of danger. She turned slowly, her pulse spiking, and Raphael emerged from between the vines, his smile polite, almost kind, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. He moved with the casual ease of someone who knew he held all the power in this moment, someone who had done this before and would do it again without hesitation. "Stay back," Luna said, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound firm, to sound like someone who could not be threatened. Raphael raised his hands in mock surrender, the gesture a performance of harmlessness that fooled no one. "Easy," he said, taking another step closer. "I am not here to hurt you." He paused, his smile widening just slightly. "Not yet, anyway." Luna's heart hammered against her ribs. She stepped back, but there was nowhere to go, the vines forming a natural cage around them. Raphael continued speaking, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing something mundane rather than her life. "You matter to him," he said simply. "That makes you important. That makes you leverage." Before Luna could react, before she could scream or run or do anything that might have changed what happened next, men emerged from the darkness. 2 of them, maybe 3, she could not process the details fast enough. Strong hands grabbed her, merciless and efficient, shattering her sense of safety in an instant. She fought, screaming, kicking, her shoes scraping against the gravel as they dragged her toward a van that she had not noticed waiting at the edge of the vineyard. Her mind fragmented into pure panic. She screamed Dominic's name into the night, pouring every ounce of terror and desperate hope into that single word, praying somehow he would hear, would know, would come. They threw her into the back of the van, and the world went dark and cold. The door slammed shut with a sound like metal screaming, and Luna felt the vehicle lurch into motion beneath her. Her hands were yanked behind her back, zip ties cutting into her wrist, and she could barely breathe through the fear that flooded her system. Everything had changed so fast. One moment she was standing alone in a garden, the next she was cargo, a thing to be transported and used. At that exact moment, on the other side of the vineyard, Dominic heard her scream. The sound cut through the noise of the wedding like a blade through silk, and his body reacted before his thoughts could catch up. Every instinct he had tried to bury, every violent impulse he had worked to control, every aspect of the man he had been before mercy and choice and her, all of it awakened in an instant. He ran, pushing past guests who barely registered his movement, past Sophia who called his name in confusion, toward the sound of Luna's terror. His legs carried him faster than thought, faster than reason, and he reached the edge of the vineyard just in time to see the van tearing away from the gravel parking lot, headlights cutting through the darkness. For a single shattering second, he saw her face pressed against the window, terrified, her eyes wide with panic. Their eyes met across the distance, everything and nothing passing between them in that fraction of a moment. And then the van turned sharply and disappeared down the winding road. Dominic stood frozen for half a breath, his chest heaving, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Then he saw it, something glinting on the gravel where they had taken her. He moved toward it, dropped to one knee, and his fingers closed around Luna's necklace, the delicate chain broken from being torn away during the struggle. He closed his fist around it, the metal cutting into his palm, and something fundamental shifted inside him. The man he had tried not to be, the man he had walked away from when he chose mercy over loyalty, when he chose to build something different, that man rose to the surface now because Luna needed him not as the person he was trying to become, but as the person he had always been. Brutal, focused, willing to cross any line. Dominic moved with instinct rather than reason as he reached his car, the world blurring into irrelevance around him. The road stretched out beneath the headlights, curves and straightaways bleeding together as he pushed the engine harder than it was meant to go. His hands remained steady on the wheel even as his chest burned with something that felt like rage and fear fused into a single driving force. Every second mattered. Every moment she was with Raphael was a moment she was in danger, and the weight of that knowledge pressed down on him like gravity multiplying. He knew where Raphael would go. The old storage buildings on the outskirts of the city, the forgotten places where screams did not travel and witnesses did not exist. Raphael was predictable in his cruelty, always choosing locations that maximized his sense of control. Dominic had been to those warehouses before, years ago, when he still belonged to the world Raphael represented. The van's taillights appeared ahead, glowing red in the darkness, then vanished behind a curve. Dominic followed without slowing, without hesitation, his foot pressing the accelerator harder. He did not call for help. This was his responsibility, his failure for letting her walk away alone, his line to cross. Some things could not be delegated or shared. Some things required you to become the worst version of yourself to protect what mattered most. The warehouse rose from the darkness like a scar on the landscape. Industrial decay made visible, rusted doors hanging at angles, a single flickering light above the entrance casting shadows that seemed to move with malicious intent. Dominic stopped the car and stepped out into the night air, sharp and alive against his skin. Inside he could hear movement, muffled sounds, and beneath it all her voice. Luna's voice, strained and afraid but still fighting. Something inside him went quiet in that moment. Not calm, nothing about this was calm, but focused, singular. Every part of him aligned toward a single purpose. He entered the warehouse without hesitation, slamming the door open with enough force that it crashed against the wall and echoed through the cavernous space. The smell hit him immediately, oil and dust and the particular metallic scent of places where violence had occurred before. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor, and his eyes adjusted quickly, scanning for threats. For her. Luna was on the ground 20 feet away, her hands bound behind her back, her sage-green dress torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with tears but her eyes still fierce, still fighting. Alive. Dominic breathed fully for the first time since hearing her scream. Raphael stood between them, holding a metal bar casually, as if it were a walking stick rather than a weapon, his smile crooked and satisfied. "You came fast," Raphael said, almost conversationally. Dominic's voice came out like ice, each word deliberate and final. "Step away from her." Raphael laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. "Still playing savior. Still pretending love is stronger than power. When will you learn?" Dominic moved, not with the wild rage of someone out of control, but with the brutal precision of someone who knew exactly what violence looked like and how to wield it efficiently. The metal bar swung toward his head. Dominic dodged, the air whistling past his ear, and closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His fist connected with Raphael's jaw, and the sound of bone cracking was satisfying in a way that should have disturbed him but did not. Raphael staggered back, caught himself against a stack of crates. They collided, bodies slamming into wood that splintered under the impact, metal ringing as tools scattered across the floor. Raphael gasped for breath, rage flashing in his eyes, and spat blood onto the concrete. "She makes you weak," he said, his voice ragged but defiant. "That's why you'll lose. If you've ever felt that moment when everything you've tried to become gets tested by who you used to be, when the person you were and the person you're trying to be collide, then you understand what Dominic's facing. Sometimes love doesn't make us weak. Sometimes it shows us what we're actually strong enough to fight for. Stay with this. Dominic grabbed Raphael's collar and slammed him into the floor, his knee pressing down on the other man's chest, all his weight behind it. "You touched what was not yours," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Raphael laughed, blood coating his teeth, making the sound wet and ugly. "You always choose mercy. That's why you lose. Because you can't do what needs to be done." Dominic paused, just long enough for the words to register, just long enough to understand what Raphael was really saying. That mercy was weakness, that love made you vulnerable, that caring about someone meant you had already lost. Then he struck again. Once, twice, deliberate and final. Raphael went still beneath him. Dominic rose immediately, his attention shifting completely away from Raphael, as if the man had ceased to exist the moment he stopped being a threat. He crossed the warehouse in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside Luna, his hands shaking as they reached for her. "Luna," he said softly, and his voice carried none of the violence it had held moments before. Only tenderness, only fear that she might be hurt beyond what he could see. Her eyes opened, meeting his, and though fear lingered there, so did something else. Recognition, trust, relief. "Dominic," she whispered, his name barely audible. His hands shook as he pulled a knife from his pocket and cut through the zip ties binding her wrists. The plastic fell away, and Luna collapsed forward into his arms. He caught her, held her tightly, as if she might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly. "I'm here," he said into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe now." Her body trembled against his, her breath coming in uneven gasps. "You came," she said, and those 2 words carried disbelief and gratitude and something deeper that neither of them had named yet. "Always," he responded, and meant it with every part of himself. Sirens sounded in the distance, growing closer, their wail cutting through the night. Red and blue lights would be painting the warehouse walls soon, and there would be questions and consequences and explanations required. But none of that mattered in this moment. Luna pulled back slightly, just enough to look at his face, to search his eyes for answers to questions she was still forming. "Why did he say you hide things?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why did he say I make you weak?" Dominic stopped, looked at her fully, and made a choice he had been avoiding since the moment he walked into that ballroom. "Because I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid that if you saw all of me, everything I've done, everything I've been, you would walk away. That you would realize I'm not who you thought I was." Luna shook her head weakly, tears forming fresh in her eyes. "I would have stayed," she said. "I invited you, remember? I saw you before you showed me your world. I chose you first." Dominic closed his eyes, understanding settling in his chest like something both painful and necessary. Raphael had been wrong. Weakness was not the capacity to love, weakness was the fear of loving fully. The choice to love Luna, to put her safety above everything he had built, to lay down his empire if necessary to keep her whole, that was not weakness. That was the most powerful thing he had ever done. The sirens bathed the warehouse in red light, but Dominic saw only her. Months passed like slow healing breaths, the kind that did not rush pain away but instead taught the body how to live around it, how to carry scars without letting them define every movement. Luna no longer startled at shadows the way she had in those first weeks after the warehouse. She no longer folded herself smaller when entering rooms, no longer instinctively moved to the edges of spaces. The scars remained, physical and emotional, visible and invisible. But they had transformed from wounds into stories, from sources of shame into evidence of survival. Dominic changed too, though not in the ways people expected. He did not soften his power or pretend to be someone without history or capability for violence. Instead, he chose where to place that power, who to protect with it, what to build with it. The world he had ruled did not disappear simply because he wanted it to, but it stopped reaching for Luna, stopped treating her as leverage or weakness or anything other than the woman he had chosen. They learned each other's truths in pieces, offered rather than demanded, accepted rather than forced. Dominic visited Luna during her hospital stay, sitting beside her bed and holding her unbroken hand while telling her about his past. The choices he had made when loyalty meant everything and mercy meant nothing, the people who had been hurt by his decisions, the version of himself he had tried to leave behind. Luna listened without judgment, without flinching, and when he finished she simply said, "That was who you were, not who you are." Luna underwent physical therapy, learning new ways to move through the world with her missing arm, discovering strengths she had not known existed. She commissioned a custom prosthetic, not to hide what was missing, but to celebrate it. The artist she worked with engraved it with vines and symbols of growth, turning absence into art, limitation into choice. Sophia sought forgiveness, and Luna granted it cautiously, with clear boundaries and honest acknowledgement of the pain that had been caused. They built a new relationship slowly, brick by careful brick. Not competition or comparison, but two women learning to see each other without the distortion of childhood roles and unspoken hierarchies. Dominic dismantled the aspects of his empire that would continue to harm her, that would make her a target or a weakness to be exploited. He became powerful in different ways, through loyalty that was earned rather than demanded, through protection offered freely rather than control imposed forcefully. Together they built something that looked nothing like either of them had imagined. Not a life free from danger, because danger would always exist in Dominic's world, but a life with eyes open, choosing each other anyway, every single day. They returned to the same ballroom months later, the place where everything had changed, where Luna had been invisible and then undeniable in the span of a single evening. But everything felt different now, smaller, more intentional, honest in a way the first wedding had not been. There were no whispers of pity, no undercurrent of fear, no judgment disguised as kindness. Only people who knew why they were there, who understood what this moment meant. Luna wore a dress she had designed herself, working with a seamstress who understood that this was not about hiding or concealing or making herself smaller. One sleeve flowed free and elegant. The other side was open, unhidden, her prosthetic arm fully visible and celebrated. A work of art engraved with vines and symbols that caught the light and announced that she was claiming space rather than apologizing for taking it. Sophia stood beside her, not as a competitor but as a witness to her sister's transformation. She leaned close and whispered, "I see you now, really see you." Luna smiled, genuine and free. "I know," she said. Dominic waited at the end of the aisle and he looked different too. Still powerful, still dangerous in the way that some people simply are, but transformed by choice. He had laid down the need to rule through fear, had chosen surrender, not to weakness, but to something stronger than control. When Luna walked toward him, she did not hesitate. Her steps were steady, her gaze unwavering, and the world moved aside willingly, making space for her passage. Dominic took her hand. Both hands, the flesh and the metal, holding them with equal reverence, and his breath caught visibly. "You changed everything," he said quietly, meant only for her. Luna answered without fear, without hesitation. "So did you." Their vows were simple, raw, truthful in a way that formal words could never be. Dominic spoke first. Loyalty without ownership, protection without control, love without condition. Luna's voice was steady as she responded, "Courage, truth, a life lived fully without shrinking." The kiss that sealed those promises was not dramatic or performative. It was certain. It was the physical manifestation of a choice they had been making every day since the night in the warehouse, the choice to see each other fully and love anyway, to accept darkness and light as inseparable parts of the same whole. Applause rose around them like a blessing, and Luna felt it differently than she had felt attention before. Not as judgment or pity, but as genuine celebration of something hard-won and honestly built. Later, as the sun dipped low and golden light warmed the ballroom, Luna leaned into Dominic's chest, watching the sky soften into evening. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing this? Choosing me?" Dominic traced the lines of her prosthetic arm gently, his fingers following the engraved vines. "Every day," he said, and before she could pull away, before hurt could register, he smiled. "Because regret means I chose something real, something that costs me, and anything worth having should cost something." Luna rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Once I thought I was invisible," she whispered. He kissed her hair, his voice soft but certain. You were never invisible. The world just wasn't ready. Music played around them. Glasses lifted in toasts. Laughter echoed off the marble columns and crystal chandeliers. But Luna understood something now that the beginning of this story could never have told her. She had not been saved. She had been seen. And there was a difference vast as oceans between the two. The man who had ruled through fear and maintained power through control had laid that power down willingly. Not at her feet, which would still have been control, but beside her, for the rest of forever. Being invisible had hurt in ways she had learned to live with, in ways she had accepted as her unchangeable fate. But being seen like this, being chosen despite the darkness, despite knowing the full cost, that was transcendent. That was transformative in ways that safety could never be. As the evening deepened and guests began to drift toward their cars, Dominic pulled Luna aside to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the remaining celebration. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Luna's breath caught as he opened it. Inside was a pendant, new and gleaming, a mirror to the one she had lost the night Raphael took her. But this one was different, deliberately so. It was engraved with both their names intertwined, and beneath that, a single word in script so delicate it looked like handwriting. "Chosen." Luna's eyes filled with tears as she understood what this meant, what he was saying without words. In a world where she had expected to spend her entire life invisible, where she had learned to make herself smaller and quieter and less, she had been chosen. Not despite her scars, physical and emotional, visible and hidden, but because someone had loved her fully, had seen her completely, body and trauma and strength and all. Sometimes the stories that matter most are the ones about being seen when you've spent your life being overlooked, about being chosen when you thought you were unchosen. If Luna's transformation is resonating with you, if you're carrying your own invisible wounds and hoping someone sees past them, then you understand why this matters. Don't forget to carry this feeling forward. Let it remind you that being vulnerable enough to be seen is the bravest thing you can do. Dominic fastened the pendant around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin, and the metal settled against her heart with a weight that felt both literal and metaphorical. "Forever," he said, and it was not a question or a hope. It was a statement of fact, a promise carved into the foundation of whatever life they would build together. "Forever," Luna echoed, and she meant it with every cell in her body. She understood something now that would shape the rest of her life, something fundamental and true. She was no longer the invisible twin, the overlooked sister, the woman who had learned to disappear to make others comfortable. She was the woman who had been seen by a man who ruled the world and chose to lay that world down for her. She was powerful not because someone had given her power, but because she had been brave enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to invite someone into her darkness, brave enough to believe that being seen was worth the risk of being hurt. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure Dominic knew that his choice to love her, his willingness to become something different, to choose mercy when the world demanded violence, to protect without controlling, was the greatest power he had ever wielded. The ballroom lights dimmed as the evening finally ended, and Luna stood with Dominic's hand in hers, watching the last guests depart, watching her sister smile at her with something that looked like genuine pride, watching the world rearrange itself around this new truth. She was no longer invisible. She never would be again. Because once you have been truly seen, fully, honestly, without conditions or caveats, you carry that visibility with you forever. It becomes part of your spine, your posture, your presence. It changes the way you move through rooms and the way rooms respond to your movement. Luna had walked into this ballroom months ago expecting to fade into the background. She walked out of it now knowing that she would never fade again, that she had claimed space in the world in a way that could not be taken back or diminished. And beside her, Dominic walked with the quiet confidence of a man who had discovered that the greatest empire he could ever build was the one he built with her. Brick by brick, choice by choice, forever by forever. Thank you for watching and listening to Luna and Dominic's story. We hope it reminded you that being seen truly, fully, without apology, is not just possible but necessary. That the scars you carry do not make you less worthy of love, but are simply part of the story of how you survived. Carry this with you and remember, you were never invisible. The world just wasn't ready yet. Until next time.